Live from Austin, Texas, this is the Plutopia News Network Happy Hour. Our guest tonight is Heather Barfield. The not ready for cable news players are here. Maggie Duvall, Scoop Sweeney, and our Plutopian-elect, John Lebkowski.
I am what?
Plutopian-elect.
Oh, okay.
We
are very happy to have Heather Barfield here. Heather is here with something to talk about, but let's see. Do we have other people here yet? Let's see.
Like
I see
Susie may be joining there.
I'm joining here. I just can't figure out my camera because I don't know why. So I'm going to go to my other camera, but please go ahead. I will be here. I'll be here.
All right. So Heather, what are you working on these days?
Really surviving and trying to thrive during COVID days as a theater practitioner, theorist, thinker, educator. Those who live in Austin in the theater community might kind of know somewhat whom I might be, and we're kind of all part of this pretty intimate community here in Austin. And I am an adjunct professor of drama at Austin Community College. And I have done a lot of theater work as a director and also as a producer and writer, but also as an arts administrator within the community. And also, got my PhD in performance as public practice from UT Austin, and then my master's in performance studies at NYU. And a lot of the work that I focused on when I was as a graduate student and also as a PhD student, a lot of it is about the intersections of new media, technology, and performance. And in fact, you may have some people in your network, John, that saw the show that I did in 2016 called Privacy Settings, in which I adapted Aeschyles's Prometheus Bound into a modern day context and had the lead Promethean hero be a Snowden-esque type character who was caged away on the Caucasus Mountains behind plastic screens and chained to his keyboard as the various gods went to visit him. Gods Oceanus was the Glenn Greenwald-esque character, and we had a kind of a Patriot Act lackey character as Hermes, and we did little song and dance numbers that were based on the lovely titles that the NSA gives to their secret spying programs, such as Prism and Stellar Wind. And we did this as a devised performance, essentially. I may have adapted a lot of the script, tried to contemporize the Aeschyles's script, but truly it was, in the theater world, a devised collaborative project. And in many ways, I feel like it was just kind of like level one, like with more funding and with maybe longer rehearsal schedule and a little bit more tech at our disposal. We could have done a lot more with it, especially in Act 2, because we were using audience data collected both before, during,
I forgot about that. Yes.
And we had everybody sign their own sort of click wrap
contracts.
Yeah, the EULA stuff and before they entered, which always caused a backlog because people are like, why is it taking so long to get in there? So speaking of gatekeeping, right? You see how I'm leading into this?
Yes.
So one of the things that really interests me lately, not only as somebody who I don't think I'm a technologist. In other words, I don't have formal training in engineering, but I find myself ever since I was really young as being really interested in what media and technology can do, and creating theater and how human beings interact with the technology. Techna, of course, meaning art, right? The Latin word for techna, art, that our interaction with technologies I'm really interested in. And so when we think about gatekeeping these days, it's just starting to kind of pour out of me these ideas around gatekeeping. I'm getting sort of kind of like maybe sickly obsessed with it. So when you asked me, what am I working on? I don't know if I'm working on it formally right now, other than this initial conversation to see what other people are interested in talking about, because I have a list of, I think I have right now these 50 things, 50 ways that we can talk about this concept of gatekeeper. And, just so we can play sort of gatekeeping bingo here, I'll just throw out some ideas if y'all are willing to play the game for a second.
Yeah.
And we can move from there, and what strikes your fancy. So maybe even, since we're in the Zoom chat room, I wonder if there's a way that like the people in this call, like, this is interactive theater a little bit. So when I name a gatekeeping like sort of theme, you can in the chat, you can like put like an exclamation point, or how about just an O, a big wide open O for like, yes, that's the topic. So, for example, I'll mention the gates to heaven. And if that's something that you're interested in talking about, you put an O.
Okay.
And then there
Got
can be
it.
sort of this interactive aspect. And if you're not interested or it doesn't really strike your fancy, you just leave it be. Now, we won't really know because I can't really time it, but it's just an interesting sort of way to interact. So put your
Yeah.
finger on the O and we'll gamify this just a little bit.
All right.
So speaking
Oh.
of gatekeepers, right? So
Yeah.
like the big, in fact, here's a big O, right? So this is the arena in Arles, France, right? So, oh yeah, and Maggie's got an O, and John's got an O or a zero or open, right?
A
And we all have our
mandala.
windows open on
An
our
O-shaped mandala.
an O-shaped mandala, and let's just go through my list here. So what ways that we can we talk about gatekeeping? Let's start with mythologies and passing through a gate. For example, Inanna's journey, and or something like the dance of the seven veils. What does it mean to pass through gates as a means of spiritual acquisition, right? And evolution. So that's one. Gatekeeping, when I immediately thought the first thing on my list was Aaron Schwartz and JSTOR and the gatekeepers of academic knowledge and the what's behind the gate of peer-reviewed journal articles that the regular folks don't have access to. And Aaron Schwartz infamously hacked into JSTOR's servers and downloaded hundreds of thousands of articles to give to the communities
It's
at
like
large.
the concept of crashing the gates, right?
Crashing the gates. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Social media gatekeepers. So Twitter accounts being shut down and closed. The idea like who gets the power to shut down the gates of the Twitterverse or the Facebook land, right? Who holds the power to do that? Their fingers on the button of that. Let's talk about the gates in relationship to job searches and the various levels of how many gates do you have to pass through before you get an interview or before you get to the person that actually decides to hire you. Think about like human resources or even just the application process itself and having to hit submit, that's the first gate when you submit your application. And the fact that we use the word submit too is really interesting too, right? When we think about social gatekeeping and social order gatekeeping, especially when it comes to BIPOC communities, and I was reading some stuff about public pools and segregation and keeping the gates closed to Black Americans who wanted to swim in the hot summer, and how when public pools became desegregated, how there was a white exodus away from those neighborhoods once the Black communities started to use those pools, and more private pools were built, more private, what do you call them, country clubs, where people could have gated entry, gated communities to keep out the rascals of society. And of course, as we know, it's based in white patriarchal supremacy, usually almost entirely. and also on the inverse here about gates and gatekeeping, when we think about colonialism and the fact that, that when there is no gate, those that are imperial, have an imperial mindset and want the resources from that particular region will basically charge through the gate without asking permission, without asking for entry. And so this is why right now there's a lot of emphasis on land acknowledgements in many community gatherings, especially in theater communities and social justice communities, to really acknowledge that the land that we're on is actually a gate that we illegally passed to stand on now. And as white, most of us white immigrants to these United States of America. I'm going to keep going. Borders and barriers. So that's going more into thinking about, the Border Patrol in Mexico and Canada, and the valuation of a border, right? Nation states are defined by their gates. And of course, we can go on and on about that. I'm going to move a little bit faster because now I'm getting a little academic-y, and I just want to make this a little bit more fun. Okay, internet access points is a gate. National intelligence, top security clearance is a gate, as an example. International politics and diplomacy. Who do you know that you need to know in order to know what you need to know? The birth canal as a gate. Being born, you passing through that gate, the vaginal canal as a gate. Hello. Let's see here. Language as a gate. The barriers to language acquisition. Translators being a gatekeeper, right? Here's a good one. Did you all know that presidential chiefs of staff are often called colloquially the gatekeeper? And you can go on this whole sort of fun little train ride looking at the gatekeepers of various presidents. Media as information gatekeepers. So how the media portrays somebody, something, or a social or racial class, economic class, media itself is a gatekeeper, as we all know all too well how it changes the way we think. Gendered gatekeeping. Let's think of the whole bathroom situation. What is it? SB2 in Texas, for example, and trans bodies and like passing through the gate. The idea of passing it as a gate process. Again, I know that like lots of people have written about this far more eloquently and academically than I have, but I'm just joining this gatekeeping train. So if I'm saying a little naive things, I apologize, but I feel like we don't talk about this quite enough in this culture. All right, let's see, I'm more than halfway through. So speaking of social class, right? So how do you gain an upper hand? If you are born in a low class, low caste in some societies, what gates can you pass through in order to achieve your dreams, if any? Is there a gate that you just can never pass? And who allows you to pass through that gate or not? Let's see here. We can also think of things like tests and testing, like the STAR tests if you have a kid in AISD in Austin, right? The GRE, the GMAT, the BAR, the SAT, right? And that we so much stress passing that gate to pass that test to get a score. Let's see here. I will look academic positions. I think I've got a lot here, but there was something. Of course, this idea that the question is, who holds the keys to all of these gates? I can name the gates, and the gatekeepers are usually the ones that hold the keys to open those gates. Not always, but usually. So, and one I was gonna say the belt. Like my son is in Taekwondo, and so his Taekwondo teacher holds the key for him to pass the next sort of training level. So that's a lot, right? That's a good amount. And
we've had some more like some feedback and comments on
let me see.
Facebook, including Blair Sylvan Gray just posted something that said imprinting as gateways. Thoughts one has about oneself, what inhibits freedom.
Oh, interesting.
And there's several other gatekeepers as funnelers, money in politics as a gate as illusion of separation. Oh, and David Hensley says, preach, sister.
Well, of course, religiosity is another gate, right? So like you weren't allowed to read the Bible when it was first sort of distributed. I'm talking like sort of early Middle Ages. I mean, this is why we have liturgical drama, because the people weren't allowed to read the Bible in Latin. The only access to God was through the gatekeeper. And who was that? It was the priest, you know? And then, but of course, that all moved away. People wanted access directly to their God, and demanded to be able to read it on their own. So what happens when people do decide?
Well, and to that point, Heather, saints as gatekeepers, right? So the Reformation, you know, the Reformation. So no, I can talk directly to God. No, you have to go through all these saints for intercession. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about this. I'll shut up now. Okay, go ahead.
No,
well,
I don't.
Even if you look at something like Buddhism, which it's more of a practice, it's not exactly a religion, but there is the idea of, like in Zen, you have a Roshi, and he's sort of like a gatekeeper, but he's there because it's hard for people to find the gate and to find their way through the gate. But he's been through the gate, so he kind of knows how to show them through, right? And the gate in that case is more of a long path.
And that's where things like educators come into play, right? So a good educator is somebody who holds the knowledge and the experience, hopefully, to pass it along, right? And I think that part of my impetus for even getting involved in this conversation was like, why are not enough people
I think we lost Heather.
Uh-oh, I think I've paused.
You froze for a minute.
I don't know if y'all could still hear me after that, though.
No, we just saw your frozen image, which looked good. It's happened again.
Frozen again.
Let's see.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, I'm going to turn off. So speaking of another gate, so I was actually logged in using a VPN. And if people who listen in, if they don't know, a virtual private network. So it's a privacy thing. And so I turned off the VPN just in case it was mucking up some of my internet connection. But
yeah, that could have been
that I think it was. And it was doing great though before. So I'm using Tunnel Bear. So a little promo for Tunnel Bear. I used it when I was abroad in France the whole time. And I was, and just to speak on that. So the other thing that I didn't talk about extensively when I was talking about borders and barriers to citizenship, for example. So we're thinking about migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. And there is this long process, of course, to, especially if you're trying to get asylum status, you have to pass something called a credible fear interview. So it's this like performative action to really indicate that, like, if you were to go back to your country, that you would be you could be killed, or you could be, I don't want to go into all the negative things that could happen, because it's just, I find it to be a little violently pornographic and gross. But the idea that you have to basically make a case for, you can't go back through the other gate from where you came, because it's too dangerous of a gate to go through again. So so it's another gate that you have to go through and pass through multiple. I mean, I guess the phrase, you know, you have to jump through all these hoops, but I don't think that they're hoops at all, because hoops are open. Jumping through hoops is kind of easy when you think about it, you know.
Whereas they don't have locks on them. You can lock a gate.
You can lock a gate, right? And of course, the, you know, border walls as gates. I mean, we can expand this as far as we like, and I think that, again, going back to like, why do I want to talk about this, is that what I'm seeing, you know, just to reveal, like, as a white woman in her in her time of life right now, that I am super frustrated by the lack of opportunity being offered to communities that are screaming to be seen and heard and put in positions of power. And the fact that we had two white men again run against each other again is just, it's so insane to me that these structures have not completely crumbled yet. And I feel like what's happening, if I, in a almost a metaphorical sense, that the gate is more like a water dam, and the people are being shoved up against that dam of water. And any day now, that dam is going to crack and it's going to break open. I know I'm mixing metaphors, gatekeeping and a dam, but the idea that, like, the people are really working to shift the what is it in Matrix, the person that holds all the keys, what was his name again, the key maker. but the key maker was actually at the whim of other things too. So it almost is like, it's become such a the way that things are now has become such a systemic and multifaceted, multi-layered issue that it's almost like one of those like Escher paintings of gates everywhere, all over the place, right? You got an Escher background? That seems very appropriate, right?
Well, and I would say, Heather, to that point, it's been one of my frustration, you know, for years, you know, just being, it's all about me. No, but like the reason I left corporate life, you know, I could have been making buttloads of money now, and I could have been well off, and, you know, because I'm white and privileged and blah, blah. What drove me absolutely batshit crazy was middle management. It's like you have all this talent and all these people with all these great ideas, right? And the funding, the power that could kind of initialize that, you can't get to it because you've got all these little egos fighting in their fiefdoms, right? And, you know, I've just been thinking about that, talking with my daughter, right? Like the frustration when you have all these solutions. There's so, we're overwhelmed with this abundance of creativity and talent and can do and ideas. And there's this, just like what you're talking about, the same old guys, you know, like in the way, and like we have to go through all these channels. And I love that, you know, that image in my head of like smashed up against the dam. but all these cracks are forming, right? And it's like, how's it going to come out? So I just wanted to underscore that, what you just said.
Yeah, if I may, there are gates that some people encounter that are invisible to the rest of us. I'm a caregiver for my wife who has MS. She has extreme mobility problems. So things we walk, doors we walk through, places, stairs we go up, are gates to her. And there are many, and there are emotional gates. People see a disabled person and they become invisible. And that's a definite bad gate.
Invisible gates. That's one of the things I was just thinking about. So for instance, if you're Black, you see gates that if you're white, you can't see. You don't even see them. You don't even know that they're there because they've never been slammed in your face.
I've been watching, been watching a little bit of A.D. Bryant's Shrill series. Just I need light, I need entertainment, right?
Don't
But
we all?
and I'd been waiting to kind of watch it, and the idea of like being a person, and she calls herself, she's a fat woman. She uses the word fat, and and that became a word of empowerment for her. But the fact that so like the thing about fatness is that there's a different kind of invisibility, even though you're extremely visible. And that there's all these, of course, the term like microaggressions that that when you're in a fat body, or even as Scoop was saying earlier, if you're in a differently abled body, that that sort of begins to erase your humanity. And so there's almost like there's a gate of like what qualifies you to be worthy of my attention and time as another human being, even. And that's when it gets really kind of into the gross evilness, I think, of the cultures, many cultures that we live in, and the struggles that, of course, a lot of our communities of color and communities that are working for the same equal rights, LGBTQ folks, trying to be seen as worthy of the same laws and respect and decency as the heteronormative folks have, right? So the implicit biases that we have, I mean, again, I know that a lot of us already know this, and I feel like I'm not quite sure the crowd who's listening and watching. So I'm like, how much explanation I need to have on some of these phrasings, I'm not quite sure, but
just go for it.
I mean, a good place to start, I mean, well, I'll just start going into sort of feminism, right?
Yeah.
So there's a great book by Bell Hooks called Feminism is for Everyone. And it is not a long read. It is a short read, but it can be applied to a lot of various identities, and the sense that the struggle is the struggle to recognize human beings as being of value simply because they are human beings. And then this is where I think I can get into trouble, because there are a lot of really shitty human beings doing really awful things to each other. And just educating them is not the solution. Locking them up is not the solution necessarily. But then when we think about the prison culture that we have in the United States, and again, who is being locked up and who is doing the locking up? Why have we not locked up the Goldman Sachs bastards that got our country into the place it was in 2008? Why has there not been a real retribution and punishment to the true criminals that we can't even get a second stimulus check, but it was like that to bail out the banks? Mm-hmm. And I keep bringing this up in my inner circle, so oops, I'm bringing it up here in the public forum. But the idea, I'm just like, the fact that that American citizens, I know I'm kind of going all over the place, but I don't know how much time we have. I don't know what I'm doing.
Keep going.
I mean,
Got
I
another
get
half hour.
No need to qualify. Just keep
all right.
going.
Well, so it's just like you're hearing the things that I think about when I'm sitting here in my COVID studio bedroom thing that I have the privilege to have, because frankly, the fact that I can work from home is incredible, and because not a lot of people can. And
Ooh, you just made me think of something.
woo,
Privilege
please.
is a gate. Privilege is a gate.
Absolutely.
And you were mentioning the prison gates.
Yes.
Most of the people, a large percentage of the people behind bars have never been convicted of a crime. That gate was closed because they didn't have the money for bail, or they didn't have the social position to get OR release from jail. So that's a serious jail, a serious gate.
Well, and I was thinking this morning in the shower, because that's where I think a lot, in the shower, about, I was thinking about, like, you can't lock people up. You can't, like, teach them, blah, blah. I was thinking about, what's the difference between me and a person who shall remain nameless, who I'm related to? Like, why has this person gone completely off the rails to the right? Right? And thinks that I'm some kind of lunatic radical. And I was like, what? Okay, I guess we haven't talked for a while. But I was thinking about the difference. One of the differences is that I've traveled all over, and I like, one of the first things I did after I got into my 20s is leave that cloistered, gated community that I was living in Colorado. Super white, right? And I was like, oh my God, get me out, help me. Oh, I can't stand it. So I left for the Bay Area, and my mind exploded, because suddenly I was in a port city, a global city with all this culture. And I just was like lapping it up, and I learned so much. I got to meet all these people that I'd never in my life been exposed to. And so I've had all those kinds of experiences. A lot of the people I know, including that shall remain nameless, have always, like, had this small, tiny orbit, right? There's no interaction with the other, any kind of other. It's kind of like, Facebook, what it's turning into, right? But I've thought a lot about that. It's not sort of like a top down, you've got to be taught, right? It's like you have to experience somehow. Like, how do we do that? How do we break those gates down?
I think people don't have enough money to make those kind of,
Yeah.
to do that. And it's unfortunate, because I think travel is one of the best teachers ever. But if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. And I guess maybe that's why it pisses people off that other people can speak Spanish and English, well, I've never been there. How do I don't know. I had a bad gatekeeping experience when I moved to France. I moved there with a 6-month return ticket and no money. But I landed in the UK, and I was dressed like I was 19, which I was. And they took me in, and they told me I had not been landed. So I was in this bizarre purgatory, which there's another gate, right?
Mhm.
Dante.
Mhm.
And they read my diary, and they found out that I was coming to try to find work, but I had specified France. So that's what got me off. They said, go to France. You go directly to France. But they kept me there for 4 hours. Scared me to death.
And where was this?
This was at Heathrow.
At Heathrow. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And they
That's
held
pretty
you
weird.
because of what you were wearing?
Yes. And then they said, well, do you have any money? And I said, no. And they said, do you have a credit? Well, I had some cash, of course, because I was going to get a place, whatever. But I didn't have enough money, and I didn't have a credit card. And so they thought that I was there seeking work, which they were completely right. But
They let you go because they knew that you'd be the problem of France and not the UK.
Exactly. But it was a weird kind of I'd never been confronted with something like that before. How dare you? You know, I became a Karen right then.
Yeah, it's interesting because it also makes me think of things like no shirt, no shoes, no service. This is like these silly signs that you can see, but it's also goes further than that. That you have to look a certain way in a boardroom versus if you were on a board for surfing.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
And that the dress codes is another signaling of a gate, and how you and again, as a performance studies person, how one dresses and how we speak. And I'm not talking with a Texas twang. I'm from Austin, Texas, and I mean, it's probably, I don't even know what this accent that I have, but I could go there and I
It's
could
Ann
start.
Richards.
It's Ann Richards accent, and going with silver spoon in his mouth, and this idea that oh, ain't that nice, that whole thing, like that signals something else, as opposed to if I was, je peux pas français, si je peux, I could start going, and the switch of the brain in our own minds, that like, oh, okay, you switch the gate, or code switching in white culture, right? So if you were like a bilingual Latinx person, that's a complicated Latinx. There's a lot of conversation on what that means right now, and
You Spanish speaker.
don't want to derail, but right, so if you speak Spanish and English, right, and the idea that you have to kind of code switch, not just linguistically, but also physically, and how one behaves with one's family versus with your white teachers at school, for example. And again, this trend in American school systems of punishing, especially young Black boys at a very young age, disciplining them more than their white cohort, because they say a word differently, or their mannerisms are distinctly different, and the white teachers are simply, they just don't want to take the time to understand and appreciate the complexities of that child having to code switch constantly. I mean, how stressful that is,
Isn't that really, I mean, a conditioning kind of a thing? You have to assume that people are going to be self-aware in these kinds of situations. And I don't think we have enough people in the world who are self-aware enough to say that Black kid has some different things going on in his life. And maybe, you know what I'm saying? It's just like, how do you wake the people up in the first place? And I hate that term, wake people up or woke or whatever, but what is it that we do to shock people into giving a shit?
Well, maybe
even about themselves.
Yeah. Well, I can't really answer that, but I know that shocking is a theater technique that Anson and Artaud wanted to do, but also compassion is sort of the kind of the operation that I like, the mode that I like to at least attempt to move in, like, and sometimes it's a very fierce compassion, and kindness doesn't hurt. It shouldn't hurt.
Yeah.
But you were talking about waking up and how you don't like the term. Well, let me just pull that out really quick and go back to gatekeeping. So let's talk about dreams and dream work and the gates that we pass when we go to slumber and what it means. I mean, especially those of us that are having extreme insomnia right now. I know I'm one that is having a hard time falling asleep every night, not knowing what's going to happen when we pass through the gate of night dreaming and wake up in the morning to who knows what is going to be on the news the next day. And this idea that I saw Kevin did that in the chat, but so we have the gate and we have the other side of the gate. And what's in between the gate is often what's called, in ritual theory, the liminal space, the in-between space, right? And so maybe it's not just that you just wake people up. It's not instant, but there is this passage, this rite of passage that you have to endure. And it's often really difficult and hard and requires like steps and leaders and teachers and mystics and ayahuasca, if you want to go there. I know
There's a
some
gate.
communities that's all the way. That's their gate. Their gateway is through psychedelics, and I have no problem with that. Actually, I mean, who just Oregon? Go Oregon!
Yeah,
Yeah,
they just
go
totally
Oregon.
legalized that.
They
They
took
legalized
down a gate.
everything, didn't they?
They took down a big old gate, the war on drugs gate. Man,
I'm
Yeah.
moving there. I don't care if there are riots. I'm going.
Well, I want to suggest something. I think that fear is a gate, right?
I
Oh,
think it closes
absolutely.
us off.
It's
Yeah,
a huge
totally.
barrier. And we were talking about sort of like how to get people to be compassionate, how to get people to be kind or respectful of each other. But you know, people have such diverse conditioning, and so much depends on things that happen to you in sort of like formative period when you were uh, very young, and you know, your parents and the way that you were socialized and the environment that you were in and so forth. And you do have people who were in very difficult environments that are having quite a bit of trouble sort of being human, you know. They can't quite get their signature on the social contract. And you see all kinds of manifestations of that. And some of those people, some people have learned fear, and fear becomes a barrier for them. And if you think of that as being a gate, a barrier as a gate, it's locked. And the question is kind of how do you unlock that gate? And they kind of have to do it themselves. They have to find the way out of it. And the best that you could ever hope to do, I think, is to influence or encourage, you know. And I'm not 100% sure how to do that. We were talking the other day about uh, cults and what I'd heard about in cult deprogramming. In order to get somebody out of the kind of box they're in with cult thinking, it's useful to start asking them questions that will trigger critical thinking on their part, and maybe they start to think their way out of it. And I don't think many of us have learned that skill of asking questions and asking the right questions. So I think that's a skill. That's something I would like to be able to develop. I tend to just kind of, you know, bull in the china shop, and I just start making statements and saying things. Don't ask enough questions. And even if I do ask questions, I don't always ask the right questions. So I think that if there's a form of training that we could look for that would help us to uh, bring people into being more like human beings, um, that would be it. How to question, what to ask.
You know,
That's my soapbox.
another imprisoning gate is shyness. I was a shy kid. I grew up moving around for the first 8 years of my life from one place to another. And when we finally settled in Big Spring, where John and I grew up, I couldn't make friends. I was terrified at approaching all these strangers. And I've suffered from that through a large part of my life. That shy kid is still here. This is, my alter ego that I bring out in public. But shyness can, close a lot of gates. It's self-inflicted, but it's still a gate.
And it wasn't easy there. There were a lot of like bullies and people who were not particularly sensitive in that particular town, as you find in some little towns.
Yeah, boy, there's a gate there. Just dealing with the jocks and the rah-rahs.
And so those are the gatekeepers. The bullies are the ones trying to maintain a certain level of political, social superiority. I mean,
Power.
a power, absolutely. And
Now they're in the White House.
yeah, I'm glad you said it.
Well, to that point, I've always been frustrated by, just because I gave my daughter, different opportunities to learn different ways, right? There's a little bit of everything. And I just got really frustrated when I'd hear these parents go like, bullying is natural. It's part of the natural order. It's just the way children are. And I'm like, but I've seen kids that aren't in the system that don't treat each other that way. Probably because their parents don't, talk that way or do that. I just don't believe it. And I feel like it's the conditioning to be part of the order to keep that gatekeeping up. And boy, I got some nasty fights with parents before because they're like, you just have to toughen up your child. It's like, but no, it's not. No, I mean, we're not like in the savannah, hunting for game and shit like that. And I just feel like it's just like, how is this behavior passed on? Obviously, in my mind, it has to be through the parents. Like, we have to keep the social order, the way things are intact. It's a unconscious agreement, I think, that these are the gates and this is how it's done. And
I want to take a breath. So here's another gate, okay? And if y'all could humor me again, because I'm going back to who I am as a theater practitioner, and I'm not a political scientist or running for any office, but
That's a shame.
the idea that
It's a little late.
that our breath is our gateway to our parasympathetic nervous system. And so what we're going to do together, and those watching can join in, is we're going to breathe in and out with counts. And in between the inhale, we pause for 4 counts. And then, so there's this holding space in between the inhale and in between the exhale. That is sort of that in between liminal breath space. So we can actually literally feel what a gate is like when we open and close it with our breath. Just humor me, all right? So we're gonna breathing in for 4, 3, 2, 1, and then hold 1, 2, 3, 4, and then exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, then hold 1, 2, 3, 4, and inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, hold 1, 2, 3, 4, exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4. And then in your own time, because I need to do it too. And what you'll notice is that on the inhale, we're full. We're full as we're holding it and holding that breath, right? So our diaphragms are poofed up like a balloon, right? And we're feeling the fullness in our chest, right? It's a very full feeling when we hold the gates of inhale and exhale. Then we exhale, and then it's like it's emptiness, right? There's that emptiness in the lungs. It's deflated. and this idea that you're moving your breath between a fullness and abundance of breath to the nothingness, right? So in Buddhism, right, this is a lot of the concept of just like this egolessness, the sense that there's nothing to really grasp onto in the end. There's nothing to hold. And see how I'm timing this to kind of do a brilliant thing at the end. I'm trying here. But the idea that, like, you know, this idea of gatekeeping, these are all concepts that we've created to help us make sense of this messy, chaotic world. And I think that the question that I posed in to John as part of the Facebook kind of discussion was like, do we need gates? Are gates a part of our future? What purposes do gates have for us? And as I was trying to demonstrate with our breath, like, gates, I think, are an essential part of being human, but how can we have gates work for us and be kind of emblems of transitional strength, power, empowerment, pride even, right? You feel pride when you finally get that diploma and you pass through that gate. My son feels pride when he passes his belt test and he gets the next notch, you know, or you get the A on that in that class that you've been struggling to, or you get the promotion, right? There's something positive about gates too. And I think it's just important to acknowledge that this conversation isn't driven just from like, I want to get, you know, total anarchy, no gates allowed, because especially as a parent, I have to be the gatekeeper for my son. I have to put him in a container that is just enough open to keep him safe. And this is, of course, what a lot of parents, especially BIPOC parents, probably feel this very, very strongly these days, you know, to be a gatekeeper for their child or for their loved ones during these days. So, so I guess the question really is, you know, how can gates serve us instead of us serving the gates? Or the gatekeepers? How can the gatekeepers serve us instead of us serving the gatekeepers in a more equitable manner?
Well, I mean, politically, we pay their salaries, right? So, I mean, that's one way we could do that. And voting, obviously, although I feel like I feel like our democracy has been called into question recently. But voting, that was a gate for a long time. I mean, I guess there were gates to voting.
That's right. Yeah.
It's important. It's important to sort of understand the relationship to power. I mean, as a gatekeeper has power, and that power could be earned, but some power is just like asserted. So it's like, I mean, all of us who have just spent 4 years feeling very concerned about Donald Trump, we're concerned about him because we don't really feel that he understood his power and that he used it for, I mean, what you hope to find in a leader is someone who you've delegated power to, but who will use that power to benefit all. And they become the leader because they have the higher perspective, or maybe they get the higher perspective because you've made them the leader, but they have the perspective to have a clearer idea of what it would take to benefit all. And they would take right action for that benefit But if you have one who's totally self-interested and really doesn't care that much about the good of all, really it's just about them, then if you put them in the position of gatekeeper, they're going to exercise their power as gatekeeper in a way that serves them completely and doesn't serve the gatekeeper job, and it doesn't serve the people who are coming in and out of the gate.
So I guess that begs the question is, who is the keeper of the gatekeepers? I mean, we have institutions, right? And they're failing us. Those were supposed to be the gatekeepers. And so now what?
Well, maybe we're failing our institutions.
I just had an image kind of float up in my head of a semi-permeable membrane. You know, I was thinking about, this last couple of years about boundaries a lot, right? You know, staying open and flexible and fluid and helping to, because I love to help people, right? But I tend to go overboard on the other way, and it's just like left this, you know, desiccated husk, right? You know, so it's like, I don't want to lose that, you know? So I think about the idea of, it's not a sense of worthiness or anything. It's like, I don't know. I'm still forming in my head, but there's just something about, I was thinking about cell walls, right? And, you know, there's the good stuff that comes through, and then there's viruses, and maybe there's something in there. So I know that I'm going to be coming away from this conversation. I know all sorts of stuff is going to bubble up, but there's just something in that semi-permeable, you know, like you said, with being a parent, you know, leaving enough of the door open, but not like full bore. Because I think about these young people I knew when I first moved to California that had all grown up in communes, right? And they were completely rudderless. They were completely adrift because it was all like, just do what you want, you know, like, and they felt like lost, and that they'd been failed somehow, because there wasn't enough gatekeeping, perhaps, right? You know, it's like great that the parents were being more open, but at the same time, it was like too open. So there's something in there. I'm not sure what it is or what I'm trying to say exactly, but I'm kind of seeing it and feeling it.
I just want to interject that we're down to our last couple of minutes. Heather, did you have a spectacular finish?
I think I said what I had to say, other than speaking of, let me grab something here. This is right now the image that we see almost all the time.
Uh-huh.
I can't do it with thing on, but
That's
you
a
know,
gate.
speaking of cells, and I don't know if you can still hear me, I'm probably muffled now, but
No,
cells
we
and viruses and everything else, like the idea that, you know, I can't even fix this. There we go.
There you go.
That gatekeeping now is literally covering our faces, right? So it is a good thing to do this. It is a good thing to have protections against the dangers from the outside world sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I meant this more to be a philosophical pursuit and not a screed. But if it was both, that's good too.
It was fun.
It was awesome.
Yeah, I had a great time.
I think there should be a series of these, Heather. I suggested that in the chat. So, you know, I would like to go back to the O's and explore one a month or something, seriously. So
Those are great.
I got no problem with that. That'd be fun.
Yeah, we should definitely do this again.
Yes, indeed.
I can do more
Thanks, everyone,
interactive
coming
theater.
in.
Thank you.
Tune in next Thursday, November 19th, when we're joined by two-time Grammy nominee Sidney Bullins. Sid's work has taken him from singing backup on tour with Elton John and lead vocals on the Grease movie soundtrack to creating 9 critically acclaimed solo albums with help from friends including Bonnie Raitt, Lucinda Williams, Steve Earle, Bryan Adams, Emmylou Harris, Delbert McClinton, Rodney Crowell, and Sir Elton himself. In 2011, Sidney made the difficult and daunting decision to transition from Cindy to Sydney. He has written and been performing his one-person theatrical shows somewhere between Not an Ordinary Life all over the U.S. and an award-winning documentary short about his life called The Gender Line is now screening in major film festivals around the world. Sid speaks on gender, LGBTQ and culture, and music issues in colleges and universities, along with various organizations around the world. He will be joining us for lively conversation and to share a few songs off his new, highly lauded album, Walking Through This World.